So when I say digital addiction to you, what does that connote to you?
Well, it connotes something that we're all experiencing, which is that we've gotten into the habit of constantly reaching for our gadgets. So, although a doctor will say, well, that's not a real addiction, you don't have real withdrawal, it acts just like it because that habit is so deeply entrenched that we reach into our pocket before we even decide to do that. We find ourselves with something in our hand before we even know. And then we say, how did that get there?
Why are we always reaching for our devices? How does that habit get formed?
Well, we're rewarded every time we reach into our pocket, right? It's like, we have biology that drives us to find the things that help us to survive. So when you see something that's delicious on the horizon, your attention heads that way, and then you start walking that way. Or for mating, or if it's something that's threatening or frightening, you head the other way. Well, we are hunter-gatherers, as we've developed as people, and we also hunt and gather information.
So we reach in our pocket, but we also never seem satisfied, no matter how good the information on the device is.
Welcome to life as a human being. We can't get enough, whether it's food uh, or security or houses or information. We're built to want more, and so we're always reaching for something.
So how do we, if we wanted to attack this challenge, how would we do it?
Well, the reaching in the pocket, the habit, is formed at a very low level. Like, you really can think of that as biology happening. We're kind of rewarded for that behavior, so it gets reinforced, so it becomes a habit. But the thing that makes people so special, the thing that makes us so fantastic, is that we get to make a choice. So we can feel impulse and stop and say, yeah, but I don't really want to do that, even though part of me is urging me on, but that's not what's best for me today.
Is the key to getting a hold of this problem thinking about the long term versus the short term? In other words, I know that at the end of a day of endlessly checking my phone for whatever reason, I'm going to feel diminished in some fashion. And to keep that present rather than the impulse, which is the thing that usually runs to the front of the line.
Right, it's a very adult, deferred gratification kind of thing. You know that if you eat 6 desserts, no matter how delicious they are, later it's not going to be such a happy feeling inside. It's no different with your smartphone.
Tell me a little bit about interruption. So when I'm writing, for example, something, it's difficult, it's hard, I sort of self-interrupt to kind of get out of whatever difficulty I'm doing. But every time I interrupt, then I have to get back on track. And in terms of, I guess what I'm trying to do is chart for people some of the ways that this constant interrupting, constant attention shredding can make us less productive, less happy. What some of the downsides are to this.
Every time your attention moves to something else, whether you're distracted by something internal, whether your cell phone beeps and you have to pick it up, or somebody's at the door, it takes energy to shift that attention, and it takes energy to come back. You're starting over, really. So you're losing resources. You only have so much, and if you spend it with constant interruption, you're not as productive.
If we want to rewire our habits, how do we do that? We talk about self gratification or delayed gratification. What else can we do to rewire our habits?
So the first step is just deciding that there's really a payoff there for you. So, avoiding the cell phone and seeing how you feel gives you the information that you need. So now you know that you feel better when you don't do that. Then you have to start paying attention. It doesn't help you to notice when you've already pulled it out and turned it on, but can you catch yourself right at the moment where that first impulse starts to be felt? And can you use that sensation as a reminder to pause for a minute?
Today I've gone without technology. And increasingly over the course of the day, I've had this hunted feeling, this itchy feeling. I want to be back into what's happening to me.
Well, you're stepping in the way of a habit. It's hard. If it were easy, everybody would successfully diet, have a stable exercise program. You would only do things that are healthy for them. But actually changing these habits is really hard. They're there for a reason. You have habits so you don't have to figure out what to do at every moment. So they save you a lot of work, but sometimes they lead you places that you'd really rather not go.
If I want to insert a new habit in my life, how long will it take me?
Well, you can start today, but it's going to take a month or 6 weeks uh, until you've created a new habit. It's not so much that that old habit really goes away. It's still there, it can still be activated, but you're forming a new habit that replaces it.
So we've talked about interruption. Let's talk about the benefits of attention and focused work. When you're not interrupting yourself, what are you getting?
Well, by having a sustained, stable, attentional focus, you have more clarity about what you're doing. You are actually more attuned even to what's happening inside. So thoughts, ideas, emotions that come up are more available to you. You're more creative and you're more productive.
Talk to me about the balance between my digital devices have delivered me some of the most intriguing, interesting, connected, wonderful parts of my life. So I wouldn't want to be done with it. How do you find that way to balance?
Right. Lots of people say, well, just get rid of them. It's not going to work. It's like saying, well, we all have diabetes and we're overweight, so let's eliminate food from our country. Good luck with that. I mean, they are fantastic. We've built them for a reason. But we do need to find a balance that's healthy. And you can clock it, you can put an app on your phone that tracks how much time you spend on these various, other apps and so on. But I think if you're paying attention, you know. You can feel it, right? At the end of the day, you know. And so since you're trying to do this for a lifetime, not for this week or this month, I think that you have to reestablish what matters to you, set a goal, not a goal of hours or minutes, but a goal of functioning well and feeling well, and then pay attention to what happens.
So, is the first step in dealing with this digital interruption stepping back and sort of assessing the larger? I mean, it feels like it's stepping back and sort of assessing your larger worldview.
Right, noticing what's happening, and then realizing that it's not exactly what's best for you, and then deciding to make a difference.
So, if I want to build balance, I need to decide to make a difference. I need to recognize it's going to take some time. What other elements are there in terms of trying to build this balance?
Well, I teach mindfulness, so I'm a big proponent of mindfulness for things like this because mindfulness is really a process that trains your attention to be more stable. So you notice better. So you're able to catch that impulse before it becomes, the cell phone out of the pocket. You can pause at a time when it still makes a difference. So mindfulness, training yourself in mindfulness is really like, exercising to make your body healthier. It's something that you do over time to enhance a capacity that then helps you.
So, if I want to be more mindful, what do I do?
Well, it's a little bit like saying, well, I'd like to be more physically fit. And I could say, well, go to a gym, John, come on. But it's more complicated than that. You'd have to find a way to train yourself. And so maybe you'd use an app, maybe you'd go take a class, maybe you'd read about it and just try it on your own. Lots of people have tried all of those things.
Meditation is also a useful part of mindfulness.
Oh, mindfulness is a euphemism for meditation. We used to talk about meditation, which was for weirdos, people who were practicing some other religion at some other time or place. So mindfulness, which is really just a kind of meditation, is a word that's become fashionable.
To begin trying to create this balance, we have to start long before we are ever reaching in our pocket.
Right.
And we're essentially rewiring the way we approach the day.
Right, and the word rewiring is apt because you really are fundamentally changing the way that your brain works, which means changing the way that it's wired.
What I love about the conversation we're having is that it is at the so much of when people talk about this digital connectedness or whatever, they think of little tricks, ways you can change your phone. You're talking about going down into the deep shale of the way we behave as human beings to kind of build a new way of approaching life to handle this kind of very powerful force in our modern world.
You know why there are all those little tricks out there? Because of these devices. You turn on your device and say, eliminating my addiction from, and then you read like pages and pages of little tips. And the thing is that they're interesting, so you read them the next time and the next time. And the problem is that they don't work.
With whatever I'm looking at, it is an itch I cannot scratch. It does, the more I look at it, the more I look at it. And is that right, or is that just my...
It's like any habit. If you eat a lot of sugar, you crave it. Drinking, smoking, these are things that give us an immediate reinforcement, a hit of dopamine. And then we look for it, and then we crave it. So dopamine is nothing special really, but it's just the system in your brain that signifies reward. Like, so, you know, when I say that this is rewarding or you're wired to do this, dopamine is part of that wiring. In a particular part of the brain, dopamine is released and it feels good. Whatever it is, it feels good. So that's rewarded, reinforced, and is more likely to happen the next time.
So it lays down grooves and they get deeper, and therefore you need to
deeper.
fulfill it more, and it builds on itself.
It builds on itself, and then it becomes a habit that's so automatic that you're not even making a choice. You're not making a choice to do that behavior anymore. It just happens.
So when somebody checks their Instagram account and they see their friend has liked their picture, why does it make them feel so good?
Because nobody posts their awful moments on Instagram. So when you look at social media, it seems that everybody in the world has a life that's better, more exciting, you know, more appealing than you. So sure, you think, oh, I'm just a schmoo. I'm like not, you know, doing anything right. Look at all these beautiful people succeeding.
So when somebody likes your picture or your comment, you feel a little burst of sort of psychological affirmation?
Yeah, dopamine, you might call it, right? Because we're built to look for that kind of gratification. And you know, the best way to train a person or an animal, for that matter, to do something is to not reward them constantly, but to reward them intermittently. So you get a little like, and then you don't, and then you get it, and you really get hooked into that.
I do sometimes feel when I'm using my phone like the rat in the old pellet experiment that I'm going to get the little pellet of food when I'm. Is that, I mean,
That's what's happening. You are.
kids. Kids have a very different relationship with technology than adults. Why?
Because they're less good at this adult deferred gratification kind of control. So impulse is closer to behavior. The urge comes and they can't resist it. You know, you put a cookie out on the table and say, I'm going to leave the room for 5 minutes. If you don't eat that, you can have 3 of them. And when you come back, it's gone. No, I didn't eat it. It was somebody else. Right? That's how kids are.
Where does the stress come from? Where, you know, we've heard about, even if your phone is on the table, that it can create stress or act on us. Where is that coming from?
Well, you're just feeling the impulse. It's a reminder. It's like when somebody pulls their phone out of their pocket, you do the same thing. It just brings it back into awareness and makes you think, hey, I could check my phone now.
What did we used to interrupt ourselves with before we had these little interruption bundles in our pockets?
Meaningful conversations, walks on the beach, looking at the sky.
Were we more interesting before these phones were interrupting us all the time? I mean, is there a real diminution in quality of life, do you think, as a result of these?
Yes and no. What I wouldn't say diminished, I would just say different.
One of the things I've noticed in this day of no devices is that when I do transitions, when I get up from reading and go make a cup of coffee, that's when I'm reaching for the phone. Is that one of the first things you have to sort of figure out, is what are the triggering moments?
Yes, because you're good at staying on task. You have all of this learning, you have set goals, and you're good at accomplishing them. And then suddenly there's a transition. It's a moment when impulse is more likely, you know, to find its way to the surface. And you've let down your guard. You're not, you know, your working memory, the part of your brain that says, you stay on task, this is what you're doing, has relaxed for a moment.
What I love about knowing about dopamine and those grooves you were talking about is that I then know that I shouldn't check it while I'm just transitioning from one room to another, because I'm deepening those grooves by checking it, even though I've got nothing I'm doing special in as I walk from one room to the other. But I am aware that the more I check, the more I'm going to want to check.
Right. And if you notice how it feels, the less you check, the better you'll feel. So the whole thing, a lot of it is really about understanding how we work and then deciding what you really want.
So you practice mindfulness, you've thought about it a lot. So do you still battle this self-interrupting digital addiction yourself?
It's exactly the same for me. My biology is exactly the same. In the same way that, I'd rather eat food that's unhealthy or sometimes not exercise. So the mindfulness gives me choices, but it doesn't change biology and it doesn't prescribe anything. Actually, I might be in a situation where I wouldn't be using my phone. And by paying attention, by actually noticing what's going on, I might think, you know what, in this moment, even though it's not my rule, I'm going to do it for this reason. So I make better choices.
Going back to this idea that there are wonders in connectivity and opening yourselves up to, all the world has to offer through connectivity of the internet or through your phones. Should one set aside time for that? In other words, time to kind of have a digital walkabout where you can do this kind of discovery. And by setting a discrete time, you maybe gain some control over it.
I think that it has a value. Just like, so I teach mindfulness. So people would say, well, does your mind never wander? And I hope not, I hope that my mind wanders often, because that's when we're creative. That's when things that are outside the box come into awareness. Sometimes our best ideas happen when we're wandering. But if it's a steady diet, if there's nothing but that happening, then it's not healthy. Devices are no different.
What is the benefit of mindfulness?
In its most straightforward aspect, mindfulness is training attention. It makes attention stronger, so you're able to notice what's happening, make better choices. But there's something else that's more important that happens when you train attention this way. The attention doesn't just become like more mobile. We don't just have better control over it, but it becomes brighter, more clear, more robust, so that when we look at the sky, we don't just see the sky, with half of our attention, but it's blue. It's clear. It reaches. It means something. When we look into another person's eyes, we don't just see them kind of through a haze of partial attention. We really experience them. We connect. So the most important thing about mindfulness isn't just that it lets us move our attention where we want to be more productive. It's that we use our attention to find depth and meaning and connection in our life. And that's what really matters most.
So mindfulness not only helps us train our attention to resist this digital siren song, but the things that we do then put our attention towards are we are more keyed into that than we would be.
More connected, we experience it more fully. If you're eating something, you actually taste it and feel that complexity. If we're talking to somebody, you realize how complicated this story that they're telling is, and you feel their feelings. You connect better.
After a day of digital interruption, you feel almost like a wraith from the Lord of the Rings, which is to say, a person who walks through the earth but is hollow inside.
Right.
The mindfulness you're talking about not only helps you not be wraith-like, but be actually even more rich in your experience than you would have been at the beginning.
It's the opposite of that experience of thinning out. And, everybody wonders, what is this mindfulness thing? Why are people nuts about it? Attentional training, who needs it? But the thing that people don't say, although if you ask questions, you'll find that it's right under the surface, is that the real payoff is in finding that your life has richness and meaning and a quality of depth that you hadn't noticed before, or that you had begun to lose. So as we go through life and we get used to what we do and we kind of, we've seen it all, we begin to feel a little bit more shallow, like less connected to the root of things. And mindfulness undoes that. That's why people are so passionate about it.
Should we teach attention training the way we teach physical fitness in schools?
You are preaching to the choir here. Absolutely. And schools are catching on. There's more and more interest, and more schools, lots of schools in the Philadelphia area where I work, are teaching their students mindfulness.
How should we think of attention? Is that the unit of measurement we should really be talking about here? Is attention how to husband it, how to get more of it, how to hold on to it? Is that the key?
Well, the thing that devices take from us is a kind of a stability of attention and the ability to have a full, complete focus. So when attention is drawn here and there over and over again, it becomes fragmented, sort of piecemeal. It doesn't feel all of one thing. It doesn't stay still anymore, and our experience of the whole world becomes fragmented in that same way.
The solution we're talking about here is changing your worldview, not just the view on the screen of your digital device.
Right. And that's why mindfulness is such a big deal. By learning to have attention be stable and open and more receptive, we find that we're living in a world that's deeper and richer and more fulfilling. The thing that I really worry about with these devices isn't that they're making it harder for me to pay attention, although they are, but what's happening to the next generation? Because we know that these devices aren't just distracting them, but they're actually changing the way that their brain works, in fact, changing the structure of their brains. And so they're going to use those brains to make the next generation of devices, which is going to change the next generation of brains. And so we've kind of inserted ourselves into the process of evolution so that we're changing the whole way that our brains and our lives develop and evolve. We're messing with the hardware that we use to have a life, and we have no idea what we're doing.
So what it describes then is we are just skittering and setting up a future where we're just skittering along the tops of things. Because as we all know in our bones, that the only way you can really know something and do something and do it well is if you do it at this deep level. And what you're suggesting is we're training ourselves to be incapable of ever getting to that deep level.
Right, we're creating future generations whose brains will be primed to use even more effective devices.